Hi, and thank you to our reading with Susan White, awesome prolific author with Acorn Press. You can see the book she will be reading about today, or from today, the anthology, Maple Sugar Pie, Headliner, and Such a Winter's Day, which is forthcoming this fall. I have the trailer for the anthology, Susan. Should I play that
Yep,
quickly?
sure,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right, I'll just play that and then I'll let you take it over, okay?
Okay, great. Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to, Susan, make you the spotlight, so it's your show. Here we go.
Okay. Thank you for joining me tonight. Thank you, Ida, and thank you, Tracy. And this time of year, you never know how many to expect, but I'm going to go ahead as if I've got 100 in my audience, and it's being recorded, so hopefully maybe someone can enjoy it or pick it up at another time. Anyway, thank you for joining me. This reading is sponsored by the Writers Union of Canada. It's a national public reading that they offer to their authors to apply for, and they were generous to give me one this year. And the Canada Council for the Arts, and of course, Acorn Press, my publisher. Thank you, Tracy Belcher, for preparing the event and hosting tonight. I'm happy to be having this event in August, a month so full of memory and importance to me. 14 years ago, it was on the 10th of August that news of my first place win with my manuscript, The Year Mrs. Montague Cried, in the Atlantic Writing Competition, brought about the publication of my first novel with Acorn Press. 12 more novels have followed. This summer, I have spent some of my time in my newly constructed gazebo that I can see right outside my window. And I've been reading some of my previously published work, partly maybe as a way to avoid writing, but also to do some research for the fourth book in my series that started with 10,000 Truths. I plan on getting to that maybe by Christmas time if I finish my work in progress by then. And partly just because I love to spend time in my gazebo. So either way, I decided when preparing for this reading tonight that I would read from Maple Sugar Pie, Headliner, and then I would and also read from the anthology and my soon to be released Such a Winter's Day. Oh, I see Hope has joined us. Hi, Hope. Maple Sugar Pie. Okay, I'm going to start tonight with that. It was published in 2016. Maple Sugar Pie tells the story of the Whitford family, a family impacted by loss, addiction, and impulsive choices. At the beginning of the book, Hazel Whitford is estranged from all but one of her children when her grandson returns bringing his pregnant girlfriend. Soon after, they move in with Hazel. Her farm and her life begin to change. After her death, in an effort to protect the farm and the life that they've built, Michael and Jen invite all the family members back home for a Canada Day gathering. Can this family come together and begin to heal from the events of the past? So I'm going to read a few short excerpts from Maple Sugar Pie, starting on page 24. Nan, I thought you might consider the possibility of not living alone, Mike said. Why? Are you getting me a dog? I haven't had a dog since old Sam, and I don't intend to get another one. You get too attached. What happened to Sam? What do you think happened to him, Michael? Did you think he didn't get any older when you did? Did you think he'd still be here wagging his tail when you decided to come traipsing back after 20 years? I had to get the young Adams boy to shoot him. Could have had him stuffed, I suppose. You're not getting me a cat, are you? I hate cats. No, I wasn't thinking about getting you a dog or a cat. I was hoping you might consider letting Jen and me move in for a little while, at least until after the baby is born. Why would you want to move way out here? To be honest with you, Nan, we can't afford next month's rent. We've been trying to find a cheaper apartment, but we can't swing that either. I used up everything I saved making big money out west buying Jen's engagement ring and a half-decent car. At least we don't have car payments. Maybe you should have had another job before you bought your fancy car and spent so much on a ring. I know, Nan. I thought I'd have no trouble getting a job here. You wouldn't want to bring a baby to this place. We don't have a lot of other options, Nan. We could do work for you. Jen is a cleaning machine, and I'm quite handy at carpentry. I could pretend to be insulted by your comment, but I'll be the first one to admit this place is filthy. And for sure, some things need fixing. I don't have much money, though, so don't think you're coming in here and getting all love it or listed on me. Are you saying you'll let us move in for a while, Nan? Yeah, sure, but don't think I'm going to be a built-in babysitter. I've had my fill of babies. I love Hazel. Okay, my next little excerpt on page 70. At the funeral parlor, I had stood in my place beside Mike and said the expected things to the people who came for the viewing. We had decided on one evening of viewing from 4 to 8. I could just hear what Nan would say about everything, but kept it to myself. I had dropped off the dress the day before, and I passed it to them. And as I passed it to the man, I pictured Nan when she opened it our first Christmas. I had given her a new dress every year, and every time Nan chastised me, saying she was being buried in the turquoise one, and she didn't need any more dresses. As I greeted each person, my eyes kept going back to the turquoise dress and the strange shell, the body that no longer contained the woman I had come to love so much. In the pauses of conversation, I conjured up the things Nan might say if the body were to sit up and talk. Most of the imagined dialogue brought a smile to my face, but when I thought of what she might say when she saw that among the neighbors and friends, no more family members had shown up, I felt a deep sadness in the pit of my stomach. The only one I have a number for is Clark, Duncan said when we arrived at the hospital the night Nan died. I will call him and tell him. I don't expect him to come from Toronto, but we should at least let him know. I picked up a pile of bedding and threw it in the laundry basket. Wesley came up behind me and stood in the doorway. I turned toward him, and he stepped into the room and kneeled beside the bed. He reached under and pulled out a large, flat, Rubbermaid container. Nan's pictures, he said. I sat on the floor beside Wesley as he lifted the lid and started pulling out the photographs. I had never seen any of them before, but as Wesley pulled one out at a time, he named each person in the photo and explained something about them. Page 106. We got married 6 weeks before Jack was born. Hazel always said she looked like a freak at her wedding, and she tore up the pictures her aunt had taken. I thought she looked beautiful. She was big on taking pictures once all the boys were born, but she never wanted anyone to take her picture, so there weren't many with her in them. She saved her egg money to develop the pictures she took with her brownie camera. I don't have a picture of any of them, not a one. I took the cup from Violet and had a sip of the hot tea. My father always said it wasn't the tea that burned you, it's the air, I said. Funny, I lost my father when I was 10, and I don't remember much about him, but I remember him saying that. Oh, I'm in a remembering mood today. Violet set a plate of Mrs. Dunster's donut knots on the table and sat down with her cup of tea. You just remember away, Sonny. No harm in it at all. Jack was a big baby. Long, a full head of black hair, and eyes that looked right through you. I swear he had the wisdom of a prophet from the day he was born. It made me wonder sometimes if the powers that be knew he was only going to walk this earth a short time, so they gave him an old man's heart and knowledge beyond his years. He could do anything he set his mind to if it didn't have to do with schooling. He could make a motor purr and worked on the farm like a grown man. One day he snuck back to the upper pasture and replaced the whole back fence without me knowing, and he was only 8 years old. I loved that boy, Violet. It almost killed me when we lost him. How did he die, if you don't mind me asking? Oh, my God, Violet, it's when everything went wrong. We had been married for 10 years when we lost Jack. It took me a while, at first, to convince Hazel I loved her. She never said it, but I know she thought I married her to get the farm. James Gray held that farm over all our heads as if it were Buckingham Palace. We lived under his roof, and he never let us forget it. I worked like a bugger from the day I got there, and he never so much as gave me a simple thank you for anything I did. I never thought for a minute Mary and Hazel gave me any more claim to that farm than if I hadn't. I guess eventually I got the farm for all the good it did with how things went. I see Melanie has joined us. Hi, Mel. 117. I will never forget my mother when we drove up to where she stood on the veranda. She didn't know. It wasn't like it is these days. News didn't travel the way it does now. These days, someone would have sent her, what's it called? A text, Gramps. Yeah, a text. Or somebody would have put it on that damn Facebook. Back then, we didn't even have a phone. We drove up and she came out through the screen door looking so excited to see us. She didn't need to do a head count to know something terrible had happened. We all looked like we had rolled in soot. Clark and Robin's dirty faces had white lines down their cheeks from their tears. I suppose mine did too. But Dad looked the worst. He had driven home, but it was as if he was in a hypnotic trance. And then the sound, when somehow, without any of us saying a word, Mum realized what had happened. The sound was like nothing I had ever heard, and just like the wailing I had heard from my father before he fell silent, it held more pain than an 8-year-old boy can understand. But even if I didn't understand it, it went deep inside me and has never left. I knew in that moment my parents would always carry that pain, and there wasn't anything I could ever do that would take it away from them. I know now what a terrible burden that is for the ones left behind. Page 229. Sonny Whitford stood up, steadying himself on the picnic table. I want you to help me down to the lake, Clark. Michael might have to bring his truck down to bring me back up, but I think I can walk down if you help me. I want to see all the kids swimming and the dock Duncan and Michael built. Who knows? Maybe I'll just die on the shore and we won't have to worry about carting me back up the hill. I don't think you're dying today, Dad, Clark said. You know, if I did, I would be ready. I finally got back home and I've been given the wonderful gift of seeing my kids. There is nothing more this life could give me. I am ready to go to see my beloved Jack and my darling Victoria. Maybe your mother will even welcome me. I need you to, Robin called from across the yard. I'm going to put everyone in place for a group shot on the back steps before we go down to the lake. Robin took his father's arm and he and Clark helped him across the lawn. I don't know if I belong in the picture, Robin, Sonny said. I'm the photographer, Dad. I know how to set up a picture. There's a chair for you in the front, right in the middle. Robin set his father down on the lawn chair. Restless adults and kids squirmed in their assigned places. The noise level was rising, and the photographer would have to regain control of the unruly crowd. Before he stood back to take control of the shot, Robin leaned in and kissed his father's cheek. You belong in this picture, Dad. Okay, that's maple sugar pie. Then I'm going to read from Headliner. Now, I sometimes call Headliner my forgotten child because it seems that when people pick up my books, this one sometimes gets left behind. But it was published in 2018. It was shortlisted for a New Brunswick Book Award in the Mrs. Dunster fiction category. And rereading it this summer, it kind of made me, well, I loved it anyway, but made me want to highlight it tonight. Headliner, tells the story of the Callahan family, months after the tragic death of the oldest child. Franny Callahan decides to take off to go see her brother's favorite band on the 1-year anniversary of his death. Will her disappearance be the jolt her family so badly needs to face their grief together? Page 1. Design your perfect home. Finally, I was starting my assignment for Mrs. Taylor's Family Dynamics class. All semester, I had listened to her droning on about everything from emotional intelligence to the telltale signs of domestic violence. An assignment asking you to fantasize about the perfect home should have been no big deal. Put a 50-inch TV in every room, add a hot tub and a state-of-the-art sound system, and you'd have a perfect home. But in my messed up head, all I could come up with were stupid ideas that mirrored just how totally screwed up my family was. A home appropriate for the Callahan family would have consisted of only a few rooms. The kitchen sure wasn't getting used much. You could make a peanut butter sandwich anywhere, and you could eat takeout and throw away the containers in any room. Mom definitely needed her bedroom and the bathroom, since she was always either in bed or taking a bath. Dad and Jenny would just need a place to keep their suitcases, not that they were ever home long enough to unpack. My room would stay, but the room across the hall from mine wasn't necessary. Nobody had even gone in Mike's room in the 10 months since he'd left on the bus trip with his orchestra. Page 47. I didn't have to lie about anything. Nobody asked me any questions that might force me to make something up or to avoid the truth. Jack Nicholson's favorite line in the movie A Few Good Men came to my mind. You can't handle the truth. Mike could deliver that line with all the gusto of the original. As we skirted the truth and avoid talking about anything that mattered, I so wanted to blurt out that line and see what might happen. If even one of us actually told the truth about how we were feeling, it might have been what we all needed. Even if we could just honestly tell each other how hard this was and how much we needed each other, it might have made things better. Dad and Jenny left, and Mum and I sat in silence as the news showed streams of Syrians crossing the Turkish border, fleeing their war-torn homeland. This scene was playing out on every nightly newscast. Entire families were carrying whatever they could, desperately looking for a safe place to be. I didn't know all the details, but I knew misery when I saw it. I guess the misery was more than Mum wanted to see. She pointed the remote and after scanning the guide, changed the station to E-Talk. The screen held the rich and the famous on some award show red carpet with gowns and jewelry that collectively cost more money than a Syrian family would see in a lifetime. I mumbled, "You can't handle the truth," under my breath as I stood and left the room. I went into my bedroom and turned on the turntable. I dropped the arm randomly, feeling like Mike would choose the song and in some way tell me something through the music of the band he loved. I turned up the volume to max and sat down on my bed, hugging George of the Jungle close, smelling the t-shirt. The opening riff moved from the lyrics of the first verse. I've got a little dog outside barking. Burton might have left. I might have to go let her in, but right now I'll keep reading. I squeezed my eyes shut to feel whatever emotion the song gave me. Turn that down, Franny. Opening my eyes, I saw Mum standing in the doorway. I didn't move. It's too loud, Franny. Turn it down. I stared at her, still not getting up. She stood still too, as if the act of coming across the room and turning the knob was more than she could manage. The chorus began and the drum beat echoed through the room. Franny! I stood and lifted the arm. It's the new Don't Feed the Wolf album, Mum. Don't Feed the Wolf? It was Mike's favorite band. He had all their CDs. They just put out their first vinyl. Well, stop playing it so loud. I wanted to say that by playing the music so loud, I had at least gotten her attention. I wanted to say that Mike picked this song and he was right here with me, but I knew how dumb that sounded and how upset Mum would be if I said something like that. I wanted to put my arms around her and not have to think of what I should or should not say. I wanted her to be the mother and me just some dumb kid who played my music too loud. You can put your music back on. Just turn it down a bit, Franny. I'm going to bed. Of course she was. I think my little dog might just want in this room. Just a second. What is your problem? This little dog that we inherited from my daughter. We've gotten quite close to. All right, let's see what page we're on now. Okay. I heard the barking when I was still in the cover of the wooded stretch I took advantage of when I saw several houses on both sides of the road ahead. Amira was wise to pack toilet paper. I felt a bit guilty leaving my garbage on the ground, but knew it would decompose quickly, not like the plastic bags I could see littering the ditches. As I walked back out to the road, I could hear the barking getting louder. It was coming from behind the fence in front of the house I was walking by. I hoped the fence enclosed the whole yard. Disco. Disco was a dark chapter in musical history. Mike's dismissal of an entire music genre popped into my head as the dog's owner stood on her front steps calling her barking dog. Disco! The woman opened the gate just as a huge black dog came around the end of the fence and bounded toward me. He won't hurt you. As the beast got closer, I felt no confidence in the owner's words. I was going to be mauled to death with Gloria Gaynor singing I Will Survive in my head. How ironic was that? Disco, come here. My killer stopped short in his tracks and then moved toward the woman, his tail wagging like crazy. He's a big baby, but he likes to pretend he's my guard dog. I'm sorry if he scared you. I normally keep him in the backyard if I'm not outside with him. He does like to run after the kids on bikes. The woman brought the dog over to me, instructing him to sit, and I patted his big black head. He looked at me as if he were apologizing. His owner passed me a dog treat. Ask for his paw, then give him a treat. I'm really sorry he scared you. I patted Disco one more time and started walking again, tempted to break into song. The first two lines of Gloria Gaynor's song, so fitting for what had just happened. First I was afraid, I was petrified. I laughed to myself, thinking if a movie was made of this walk, the song I Will Survive would play over the credits. The song was perfect for the last year, too. Maybe I should play it as soon as I got home and insist we all listen. Maybe even disco dance to it. Maybe a theme song was what we needed to get our act together. I mentally made a list, wishing I had a piece of paper and a pen. Maybe if I recited the list often enough, it would still be in my head when I got home. Taking risks, nature, family fun, friends, grief group. I said the 5 things again and again, reciting them like a grocery list. These things all felt so important right now. Was I fooling myself thinking that as I walked, I would be given the wisdom I needed to help Mom, to help our whole family? Would this list keep the power I felt it held right now? Was any of this going to be helpful to Mom? I had to believe it was, or I would sit down on the side of this road and weep. I would not be able to find the stamina to keep going. I had no choice, though, did I? I put myself here, and I needed to keep going to get myself home. Sitting down and giving up was not an option. Taking risks, nature, family fun, friends, grief group. I was singing the list now as I picked up my pace, changing from opera to country, knowing Mike would have gotten quite a kick out of my musical range. Another half hour or so, and I would bed down for the night. I was almost finished day 2 of walking home. And the last reading from this little book. I stared at the computer screen, the words blurry through my tear-filled eyes. My essay might seem corny and sappy, but I believed wholeheartedly in the words I had written. I didn't care if anyone else understood them. I didn't even really care if Mrs. Taylor took the time to read them, and I didn't expect her to change my mark. I wrote them because I lived them, and I knew them to be true. Lately, I could see the lessons I had learned over the last few months and the terrible reality of losing my big brother as a possible answer to my question about what my talent was. Maybe I could help more people than just my own family to see the things that matter. Maybe the wisdom I found on my long walk home was something I could share with others. Maybe Franny Callahan had something to offer after all. Okay, I'm going to move right along to the anthology. I was very pleased to be asked to participate in the anthology, which is a collection of short stories written with a modern Anne of Green Gables twist by 10 Canadian authors. This was not an easy task for me. I'm not a short story writer, and I really had to stretch and push myself. And I thank Judith Graves and Robin Sutherland, the editor, and the other authors for supporting my efforts. And I'm pleased to be a part of this. That's getting quite a little bit of buzz around the country. So I'm just going to read a couple of small excerpts from my short story, which is titled Matthew Insists on Ripped Jeans. Anne picked up the dusty volume off the table. Since coming to live with the Crawfords a month ago, she'd walked by this table and seen the faded blue book every time she came upstairs. She had just never picked it up until now. The jolt of emotion, seeing the title of the book, had been too powerful and frightening, and she'd always hurried by the table, turning her gaze away quickly. Anne already knew this book. She had taken the illustrated volume everywhere after receiving it on her 6th birthday and had read it so many times that she'd almost memorized parts of it. Reading it out loud became a bedtime routine with whichever parent tucked her in. But those days were long behind her. Are you a reader? Rosemary had asked Anne the day she first arrived. We've got lots of books around. My brother doesn't read much, but I've always liked a good story. That book on the table was my mother's when she was a girl. She placed it there years ago, so it doesn't seem right to move it. But you can read it if you want to. I've never read it, but I know movies and TV shows that have been made of it over the years. The third foster home had no books at all, but the social worker, Sandy Dixon, had dragged Anne to the library at least once a week. At first, Anne came home with an armful of books, but never opened them, until the week she picked 5 books from the M section. Anne had read all 5 books in 2 days, but trips to the library stopped when Mrs. Dixon found out what she'd done with them. Whatever possessed you to burn those library books in the fire pit, Anne? I thought you'd love them, each one having your name in the title. It's fine if you didn't like the books, but why would you burn them? Anne had shrugged her shoulders and walked away, unwilling to show this woman any of the emotion reading those 5 books had stirred up. But that was in the past. Standing in the hall, looking down at the faded old blue cover of the familiar book, she almost took the same approach. Instead, she picked it up and took it into her room. Anne sat down on the edge of her bed, remembering the cover of the library book edition. Somehow she'd forgotten about her own copy until she pulled the book off the shelf at the library that day. How had she forgotten a book she loved so much? A book her mother had also loved before her, even choosing to name her daughter Anne with an E. Anne flipped through the pages and closed the old book, recalling the last time she'd held her own treasured copy. A crash, metal crunching, glass shattering, chaos and confusion, sadness and misery. How could she possibly read this book again? Maybe instead of reading Anne of Green Gables this time, she'd try to become the main character and pretend she was living Anne Shirley's life rather than her own. Rosemary will be Marilla, and Clayton will be Matthew, Anne slowly whispered to herself. And that old woman who was here when I got dropped off can be Rachel Lynde. I'll be imaginative, chatty, and cooperative, not like the troubled foster children in the book who threaten to burn people's houses down or put poison in their wells. And another short excerpt. Clayton's breath quickened as he caught sight of the store name in large letters above the doors. As he approached, he took in the colorful display in the store window and immediately felt overwhelmed. Adding to that anxiety were the several young teenagers who came giggling out of the store and nearly ran him over. Clayton's panic intensified as he realized just from the window display that there were several styles and colors of jeans to choose from. He also really wasn't sure of Ann's size. What had made him think he could stroll into a woman's clothing store and confidently purchase the right pair of blue jeans to give Ann for Christmas? Instead, Clayton slipped into the nearby dollar store and quickly started filling his cart with miscellaneous items. No doubt Rosie could use a new wooden spoon, pot scrubbers, and some room deodorizers. He grabbed a few bags of candy and headed to the checkout. Even this store was causing him anxiety, so he knew avoiding the other one had been the right decision. Clayton had driven halfway home before he was his own man again. Shopping had been a gruesome experience, but it served him right for thinking this was a task he could undertake. He needed a woman to handle this, and asking Rosemary was out of the question. She'd voiced her opinion many times on the ridiculous hole-riddled pants the kids were wearing these days. That left only Violet. Clayton put on the blinker and checked his blind spot before turning toward her house. Pick out blue jeans for you to give Ann? To be sure I will. Violet had been all too happy to help. I'm going shopping tomorrow and I'll attend to it. I could even buy them online and they'd be delivered in lots of time. Do you have anything in particular in mind? I know the styles vary. No? I'll go by my own judgment then. Just leave it to me. Thank you, was all Clayton said, eager to be gone. Except he didn't know exactly what to say about the style he'd seen on the girls coming out of the store. Don't you worry. I'll be sure they have rips all down the legs. I don't quite get it myself, buying brand new jeans already peppered with holes, but I know that's what's fashionable these days. My own granddaughter has several holy pairs. I got after her at first, saying I could patch them for her, but that's the way they like it. That's the way they like them. I'll find a pair as holy as the best of them for our Ann. Okay, now this is a piece of paper, not a cover to a book, because it's still in the works, and I hope to see it out in the fall sometime. Tracy's been working on the cover, and we need to get the copy editing done and all that kind of thing to get it to the printer. But I'll be happy to welcome such a winter's day in the fall, I hope. It starts in November 2021. Hank Lohman is living on the street in St. John, New Brunswick, in the middle of a global pandemic and a severe housing crisis. To some, he appears to be just a sad old man down on his luck. But the story of Hank Lohman's life holds so much more. Such a Winter's Day is a story of challenge, ambition, love, heartbreak, and a story of acceptance, forgiveness, friendship, and hope. So I'm going to read the first two pages of this soon to be released book. November 2nd, 2021. Hank walked slowly through King's Square. The mid-morning sun was bright, but the wind biting. The branches of trees surrounding the bandstand were bare, the ground carpeted with the colorful foliage that had graced the square into late October. City workers had turned off the fountain, cleaned up the gardens, and removed the hanging baskets in preparation for winter. Fewer people were milling about, but the clusters of pigeons remained. A few were pecking wildly at a Tim Hortons paper bag, going after a discarded biscuit or donut. Hank felt for the gift card in the pocket of his parka. Someone had handed it to him several days ago as he stood on the corner in front of the CIBC bank. He hadn't tried to use it yet. He hated the way heads turned towards him when he walked in the door. Even when he hadn't been technically homeless, it was as if he wore a sign announcing his worthlessness when he entered the King Street Tim Hortons. He'd always had enough change to pay for whatever he ordered, but the doubt and distrust were written on the servers' faces. Sometimes the person behind the counter looked too young to be employed, and sometimes too old to still be working at a job barely paying minimum wage. Hank tried not to judge either way, but Hank felt judged by everyone around him. Strangely, this came from a feeling of not being seen by those who passed him, while at the same time feeling each stare or passing glance as a condemnation. The woman had helped up off the sidewalk a few minutes ago used the word invisible. Others walked by, giving the collapsed woman a wide berth, chalking up her stumble off the curb and her bleeding face to a drunken state, and not one they wished to engage with. Apparently, I'm invisible, the woman muttered as Hank helped her to her feet. I'm Pearl. Hank reached in his pocket for an unused folded napkin and handed it to Pearl. I'm Hank. Your face is bleeding. Are you okay? They think I'm drunk. I'm not drunk, Pearl said, dabbing at her forehead. These same people walk by me every day, but they don't even see me. Not a nod or, God forbid, a kind word. I watch them scurry along, living their busy, important lives. Not one would have a clue where I live or anything about me. I'm just some scary old lady to them. That's if they even notice me. And I guess falling on these uneven, poorly maintained sidewalks makes ignoring me even easier. We're all drunks or drug addicts as far as they're concerned. Hank sensed the anger in Pearl's words and recognized the underlying hurt. A few days ago, he had stood on the sidewalk watching workers haul out all the furniture, fixtures, appliances, and discarded possessions from the rooming house on Duke Street. Everything was thrown in the dumpster as the pompous real estate agent stood smiling for the camera while handing over the keys to the new owner. This book is a back and forth, which tells Hank's backstory. So we go from the 2021 to 1958. Hank hurried across King Square. Approaching the building, it looked pretty much as he remembered it when, as a boy, he'd come to Saturday matinees with George. It cost a nickel to get in, and just a dime would get you a bag of popcorn and a fountain drink. It never mattered what was playing. The fun was getting on the bus with George at the corner of Main and Douglas Avenue and getting off at the bottom of King Street, running up the hill, crossing Charlotte Street, and seeing the marquee of the Capitol Theater. A box-shaped structure was above the doors instead of the moon-shaped Capitol Theater sign Hank remembered, and large letters declared the building to now be the Full Gospel Assembly. An open Bible flanked by large crosses topped the gaudy sign. Hank pulled open the door and entered, envisioning the lobby as it had been when he and George rushed in to buy their tickets. Opening the inner doors, the loud chords of the pipe organ music and the congregation rising to their feet jolted Hank back to the present. He was late for the 11 o'clock service, but if he could find Tanya's family and slide into the row beside them during the singing, it might not be as obvious. People were waving outstretched arms and swaying their bodies. George had warned him this would be unlike any Anglican service he'd been to before. Those Pentecostals are nuts. They wail and hoop and holler, talking in tongues, they call it, whatever that is. But it's no stuffy Church of England service, I can tell you that. How'd you get messed up with that crowd? Hank didn't see George very often these days. George's grandmother still lived in the house next door, but George was working on a fishing boat with his uncle and Graham and Ann. When he'd been home last weekend, though, it felt like old times when they hung out. Hank had almost told George about Tanya, but he hadn't wanted to ruin the night. It had taken him months to even tell George he was dating anyone. Hank barely noticed Tanya Bennett in the first 2 years of high school, other than the fact that she wore her long hair swooped in a big bun and her dresses were almost to her ankles, causing her to stand out from the other girls with their twiggy cuts and miniskirts. Hank sported the typical blue jeans rolled up at the cuffs and the tight white t-shirt. He slicked his hair back every morning with a liberal glob of Brill cream and attempted to look like all the other guys. And this year, even though Hank's seat in biology was right behind Tanya Bennett's, they hadn't spoken a word to one another until the day in early December when Tanya walked right up to Hank's locker and asked him to the Sadie Hawkins dance. By Christmas, Tanya Bennett and Hank Lohman were going steady. After that, everything changed, and the most noticeable being Tanya's hairstyle, fashion choices, and ear piercings. But those changes were nothing compared to the big, life-altering change Tanya planned on telling her parents about at Sunday dinner today. She'd assured Hank that his coming to church would make that easier. Hank squeezed in beside Tanya just as the congregation took their seats again. He looked toward the front, wishing to see Roy Rogers come on the large screen that had once been there. And more than that, he wished it was George he was sitting down. beside. All right, those are my readings for tonight. So I guess such a big crowd might have some questions that we can end with, or comments, or something they'd like to offer. Can we do that, Tracy?
Yes, absolutely. I will unpin you here, I think, so everyone can see everyone.
Great. Hi,
Ta-da.
Ida.
Hi, Sue. Great readings.
Thank you. I'm going to visit Ida next week, or at the end of this week. I can hardly wait. Looking forward
And
to
we'll
it.
be reading in the meadow in St. Bride's.
Reading in the meadow. That's great. So what have you been up to, Ida?
Oh, getting ready for the crowd to come to the meadow and working. And other than that, I'm not writing much, but I will.
No, I'm not writing much this summer either, but we will. Yes.
We'll get cracking when you get some St. Bride's.
Ida is very prolific as well, and she's a hoot. I can't wait. Oh. Hi, Hope. How are you doing? And Melanie? Nobody else wants to speak? Hmm.
I had a question for you, Susan.
Okay, thanks, Grace.
So just from based on the readings that you did, there seemed to be like a theme of grief and loss kind of throughout your work. Would you say that like the majority of your stories do have that element to them?
I definitely think that, yes. Certainly my first book, The Year Mrs. Montague Cried, was based on um, uh, my experience losing our oldest son and going back to teaching the September after Zach died. I sometimes, I used to apologize, and my husband used to say, you should give away a box of Kleenex with all your books. But I do so strongly believe, and I know it to be true in my 67 years of life, that that love and loss is such a part of our existence. And it can be loss of, a death of a loved one, but it can also be, a loss of a marriage, or a loss of a career, or just, any kind of loss that we deal with. So I definitely that's and the books that I chose, and I guess, when I think of it, like there's so much loss in Maple Sugar Pie, and the loss in Headliner is from the siblings' point of view. When we lost our son, our daughter was 17. I had a 13-year-old and a 8-year-old, and loss that they experienced as they grew up um, with that loss is something that I try to deal with in Headliner. So yeah, I and definitely lost in Anne Green, my anthology, and definitely lost in my love of, Anna Green Gables. There was loss there. So yeah, the answer to that is there is. But I think there's also a lot of healing, redemption, just finding your way through that, because that is what the challenge is, no matter what your loss is, to carry on, to put one foot in front of the other, and learn from our experiences in life.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I see Hope has a question here, and she says, "Hi, Susan. Have you ever wished you were like Anne Shirley, as does the character in your short story?"
Yes, in fact, I think when I was young, I didn't, consciously pretend, or actively pretend to be, but I remember being interviewed when this first came out, and it just occurred to me during that interview how much I love all the books in the Anne series, and I always, every summer, I read Anne of Ingleside, and I remember what it was like to be the mother of kids, younger kids at home. So I think just the progression of Anne's life, I identified with. So yeah, and I mean, people say, oh, who was your inspiration? And I always go back to Lucy Maud Montgomery, because I think she just had a real gift for just writing the natural way of things without, just effortlessly, it seemed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? You could type them in the chat too if you would like to type them in the chat. I also put buy links to Amazon where they can purchase
Right.
your titles.
Right. Also, my website, I
I
just
can.
got that professionally done last year, and it's www. You probably have it right there, Tracy, but if you want to put that on.
I'm bringing her up. Here we go.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Here is the link for that. Your website.
Okay. Melanie is a wonderful poet and artist and a good friend. It's nice to see her here.
So Headliner, the dog's name was Disco, and there's lots of music references in that one. Yeah, that's really.
And my son's dog, he had a beautiful Rottweiler. He had to put him down last week, and his name is Disco. I always called him Disco Ball. And so, yeah, he made his way into Headliner. And then the musical references, because Michael, the brother, was a cello player and was in the orchestra, the bus accident. It happened, I wrote it and it was published right around the same time as the Humboldt tragedy. And I remember at the time, Terry Lee wondering if it was, the sensitivity about putting it out, but that was just coincidental. But yeah, I mean, huge losses like that impact the whole, town or city. And but the thing about those losses, they always impact the family, and that impact is forever. Like, it's not just as long as it's in the news and that sort of thing. And the other thing I love about Headliner, because in the news was the Syrian, so much news about the Syrian situation. And she meets a Syrian girl in Fredericton because she has something happen, and she loses her phone and her purse and her money and her stuff. And she ends up meeting a Syrian girl, and she takes her into her home for a meal and a shower. And then she hears about her loss, and the tragedy of her loss. And that's what gives her the idea to walk home. And so she walks from Fredericton to Quispamsis, which for those of you that know the area, it's not a walk like the Syrians would have had leaving their country, but a substantial walk for a young girl. And that's where she sees Disco. It's in Oromocto that Disco bounds out when she's trying to use the bathroom in the bushes. So anyway, yeah. I see. What was the inspiration for your book, The Right Retreat? Yeah, but the book, The Right Retreat, that I didn't read from, but it's about a writing retreat. And the author's name, Sylvia Wright, her last name, and her husband kind of pressures her into creating this writing retreat in a place in a remote area on the Northumberland Strait. And my inspiration was that I'd stayed, a good friend of mine, Odette Barr, and her wife have a beautiful home on the Northumberland Strait. And I was at a reading event and stayed the night with them and had a dream about this writing retreat. Several of my books have come from dreams. Some of my dreams are so bizarre they would never find their way into a book. But anyway, so I have 10 writers that come to this retreat, and Ida, who's on tonight, I had been on writing retreats with her, and so I had to put a woman from Newfoundland in the right retreat, and she gave me some, like, I love the stunned as the comforter and the quilt and different things. So that's what that inspiration was, and I really enjoyed writing that book. So it's another one of my favorites. It's funny because I do go to the farmer's market every Saturday, and I put my books on the table, and I have people come by, and certain covers catch their attention, and they'll pick them up and read the back and whatever. And then I always get asked, or I often get asked, what's your favorite? And it's like, I don't have a favorite. I'm really thankful, as I said earlier, about winning a competition with my manuscript the year Mrs. Montague Cried. And then I had sent my to five publishers and had 5 rejections. And the 6th publisher I'd sent it to was Acorn Press, just shortly after Terry Lee Belcher had purchased Acorn Press. And she had heard that I won the contest and contacted me for the entire manuscript. And then 2 weeks later, I had a contract for the first one. So that's my favorite in that way. Plus, it was so much about my son. And it's funny because my second book, I put an adult man named Zachary in my book, and I thought, oh, I wonder if Zach's going to be in every book, but he's not. But in some ways, I guess maybe he is. But yeah, so okay. In your new book, the main character is a man. Oh, now that's interesting. Is it difficult to write from this perspective? Yeah, that I think, if I think back, I think that would be my first time that my main character was a man. I knew it was going to be his backstory, and so I had to push myself to do that. But yeah, so yeah, the answer to that question. I love questions, even if there's only a small crowd. They make me think sometimes, because I remember I've done a lot of school visits, and I remember a very moving question that I really had never, sometimes you get asked questions that you haven't even thought of. I was doing a school visit once, and I think it was grade 3, and talking about the year Mrs. Montague Cried, which I wrote from my perspective as the teacher and the mom going back to school after Zach died. And I had a little boy put his hand up and ask me, did you ask your kids permission to write that book? And that really floored me, because at the time I thought, no, I didn't. And I didn't ask, my husband, Zach's father, permission to write that book. It was like I had to write it. But yeah, and that is, there's a lot of that we put ourselves into our writing. And sometimes it's like, our loved ones see parts of themselves, and maybe we've not asked them permission. I also love this one. I swim a lot, and I remember doing a school visit, and I said I think it was a grade 1 class, and I said, there's a lake in this book, and there's a river in this book, and the river's in this book, and there's a lake in this book. And a little boy put up his hand, and he goes, how did you get the water in the book? And I'm like, oh, there's not really a lake in the book. Like, water's not going to come rushing out. But I miss those school visits. I did a lot of them before COVID, and then things, shut down, and I just haven't. And I think, I don't know, teachers maybe are a little bit more protective of their classroom time or whatever, but it's changed for me. But I enjoyed it at the time.
Nice. Yes, I think, was there a man's perspective though in The Right Retreat? Did it alternate?
Oh yeah, well, that's true, because there were like at least 3 of the men of the writers were men. So yeah,
Right.
but the main character was a woman.
Was a woman, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
I
maybe you
think,
got comfortable, you were dabbling there a little bit.
yeah.
And, yeah.
And I mean, really, think about the books that are written by men that attempt to give a woman's perspective. I mean, I think, as writers, we have to try to vary our perspectives. You can't just write from a 67-year-old woman. I find really the challenge of this one, because I'm out of touch with teenagers. So I have a really good friend, Crystal, who I got, and her daughter was a teenager at the time. And Crystal was the same age as Zach. I got a lot of help with them on that one, because yeah, things are not the same as when I was a teenager, not at all. But anyway.
They're definitely not the same now either.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
So how do you make time to write?
Well, I used to write just from September to June. I used to kind of do the same schedule as I did when I was teaching, and take the summer off, because we used to put a big garden in and whatever. That has changed. So I write kind of whenever I feel like it. I usually write 3 or 4 days a week. Don't usually write at night unless I'm really pushed to try to do something. but I take time off too. Like right now, my work in progress is, I think I'm on page 95, and I had hoped to be further along with that by fall, but I'm lucky to have the time. I mean, I'm retired, so I'm lucky to have the time to do it. But sometimes it goes quicker than others, and other times and I say I want to write the fourth book, 10,000 Truths, Waiting for Stillwater and Jasper's Road. I want to write the fourth one, and I might abandon my work in progress for a few months and start it. It just depends. What about you, Ida? I know you're retired now.
No, I got another
Oh,
year yet.
Oh, I thought you were retired, but you're on
No.
vacation when we get there, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And how do you find time to write? Because you write a lot. You get a lot done.
Yeah, well, I'm not really, we bought that new house, so I'm not really writing now. I got 4 works in progress, but they might be there in 10 years' time and I might have different books. But I
Right.
got 8 books out and I'm lucky for that. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they're wonderful. And that's the thing. Like, I don't feel a lot of pressure. Like, I don't feel, someone saying, oh, you're going to have, a book out by Christmas or whatever. It's like, I'm thankful for what I've got. I'm thankful that I'm still got, a little bit of few ideas up my sleeve. So yeah. Um, you know, if I were trying to make a living, that's the other thing. I get asked a lot at school
you'd have
business,
to,
like, how do
you'd have
you
to get
make,
food stamps.
yeah, exactly. You'd have to really, push. I think a lot of times you have to do a lot of workshops and a lot of residencies and lots of, grants and stuff like that. But I don't feel that pressure either. I feel whatever comes along is kind of like icing on the cake. But yeah. What about you, Hope? What do you find time to write? She doesn't seem to want to come up and see us, but she might answer in the chat.
Maybe, yeah, maybe not.
Yeah. Anyway, well, that was great. And I always get so nervous about these things. And hi, Mel. And I don't know why I get nervous because it's all good. Mel, you gonna come in and talk?
Oh, I'll unmute you. There you
Hi.
go.
No, I'm wearing my silly thing. That's why I wasn't on the screen.
Is that for migraines?
Yeah, it's my
Yeah.
Wonder Woman crown.
Right.
Cool.
Great.
So, well done, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much, Tracy. We pulled this off, and I just got word from the Writers Union. I'd applied again for one, but I didn't get one this time for the winter, which is great because I've had one last summer and this summer, and it's all great. It's whatever. They do a lot to help writers, so it's all good.
Okay.
Anyway, all right.
All right. Thank you for joining us,
All right.
everyone.
Thanks so much, Tracy. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
See